All right. Welcome to the first meeting of the Water Reclamation Facility Citizens Advisory Committee's meeting for 2016. Looking around, we have a full house. Everyone's here, so we can establish a quorum and call this meeting to order. If you all please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you, and stand and pledge allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So announcements, presentations, besides Happy New Year's, everyone. We do have on the screen the fundraiser for the Morro Bay Bike Park. If AGP can put a little screenshot there, it looks like this January 12th at 6 to 9 p.m. at Pizza Port, there's going to be a fundraiser for our new bike park. And anyone that hasn't gone and checked it out, watch all those crazy kids do backflips and 360s and everything else. I went out there and there was 5-year-old little girls and 50-year-old men enjoying it. So it's definitely a nice community asset. Any other staff announcements or presentations or advisory committee announcements or presentations?
I do have one. I put that up there, and yeah, it is. It's some of us are over 52, you know? but also tomorrow at 6 o'clock, between 6 and 9, right here at the Vets Hall, the National Oceanographic Administration is going to be making a presentation with respect to the Shumash proposal for the Shumash National Marine Heritage Sanctuary, and that's going to be from 6 to 9 right here in the Vets Hall.
Great. Anybody else? Staff? Okay. Moving on to public comment. Anyone from the public wish to speak for 3 minutes on anything that is not on the agenda? We're seeing shaking heads. Okay. We will move on to our consent calendar, and the only item on that is approval of our minutes from our December 1st joint meeting. Any comments, or otherwise I'd entertain a motion in a second?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as read.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Okay. So a motion by Shipley and a second by Gerlich.
I'm going to abstain.
Okay. Then we'll just do a voice vote here. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay. With Sadowski abstaining.
You don't have a deal.
My New Year's resolution to be very clear on the motions for you. That brings us to item B1, an update from staff on the facility to date. So I'll turn it over to staff.
Thank you. I'll walk through some highlights from the staff report. First, Happy New Year to everybody. But some accomplishments and milestones since our last meeting in December. We've implemented the software for the program management system. It's taken a little bit of time on our end, as you can imagine, to get that up and running. But we are starting to use it for all of our staff meetings and documents and entering the budget information, and it's working really well for us. It's going to help us keep everything in one place and have everything documented for posterity once we're done. So we've completed the preparation of the application for the SRF planning loan and uploaded that application package to the state board through the FAAST system. So that was done. There was a council meeting on the 8th of December to authorize Mr. Lavick to sign that. So we do have that uploaded. We've had a coordination with the facility master plan team, and we've provided some comments to them on some just internal draft evaluations of direct potable reuse and organic waste processing opportunities. You'll see those later as part of the draft facility master plan. We've reviewed, we've continued the fatal flaw analysis and negotiation with the owners of a couple of the Morro Valley properties, so that's ongoing. We have reviewed preliminary findings from the Morro Valley groundwater evaluation. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes in more detail. We've received and reviewed some preliminary salinity study findings I have a separate item today to just talk about salinity in the wastewater collection system. We'll talk about that. We've developed an internal draft of the Water Reclamation Facility Program website. And so our plan is to have that go live by the end of the month so that you all get a chance to review it, comment on it, members of the public do. We think it's going to be a nice way to organize all the information, give folks a chance to register, whether they're citizens, interested members of the public, for regular updates, whether they're industry vendors, and create a really nice communication tool specifically to the WRF program. And we've authorized the contract for ESA to begin the data review and preparation related to the CEQA compliance. So that's all been done. So regarding the findings for the preliminary groundwater recharge evaluation, as you all know, Fugro's under contract to pull together, they pulled 450 some separate pieces of data from DWR over the last 10 to 12 weeks, and have begun putting that into a format where they can cut cross sections and tell us more about the Morro Valley Aquifer. So our plan is, what we'd like to do is provide a draft report of that to the engineering subcommittee on the 12th for review, and in preparation for the first February WRF-CAC meeting. So we thought it would be a good idea for the next couple of months to work through and get input from some of the subcommittees prior to coming back to the full WRF-CAC to help us kind of prepare and put the best materials together for those meetings. So we'll also have a full presentation of the report and the recommendations for the next steps in the agenda at the February 2nd meeting. So that would be the plan, is we'll provide the engineering subcommittee the draft report on the 12th, get comments back, and then be prepared for that February 2nd meeting. Regarding the budget, so we're continuing to use the format for that we created last time for the project expenses and estimated costs for consultants to date. We have added a couple of columns there for amount remaining in contracts and percent complete in one column as well. But our plan is we'd like to work with the financial subcommittee on a better financial reporting tool. And so we'll also be, over the next couple of weeks, we'll be sending some draft report formats to you all, to the financial subcommittee, to get comments and direction. We'd really appreciate that in helping us communicate the budget information, for WRF-CAC and council and members of the public. So we'll be sending you that tool to help us refine it. And we appreciate your assistance with that. So at this point, that's all I really have on the overall updates. We'll get into detail on salinity as a part of a separate item. But any questions you might have? Thank you.
Any questions, have at it. Jenny?
The question I have is, you said that you would be providing the draft format to the finance subcommittee in a couple weeks.
Yes, ma'am.
Will you have the draft, the refined draft available for the next meeting?
Yeah, that's our plan. We'd like to have that ready for the February meeting.
Perfect.
So that would be our goal, is send it to you all, get comments. We've got the information entered into the program management software now. Mm-hmm. And we'd like to do is get your input and be ready for that February 2nd meeting to bring something back to the full WRF-CAC.
Okay, great.
Is the engineering on the 12th? Are we going to have a meeting on that then, or?
Well, my thought was I would provide it to the subcommittee, and you all could decide whether you want to meet or not, or
Okay.
you all could just review it and send me back comments. So I'm open to however you all would like to do that.
And it's okay to go ahead and reply to the group within the engineering subcommittee and yourself, and we wouldn't be in any kind of violation.
That's correct.
Okay,
That's one of the that's the subcommittees we don't have to notice subcommittee communication, but we'll bring everything back to the full meeting.
Would you mind sending me a copy that you're going to email it, correct?
Yes, sir.
So would you mind including me on that? And if you don't hear from me, that's fine too. But I would like to hear from you,
Okay.
please.
I do have a quick question. Do you know how large is the study that that you're going to pass out from Larry Walker regarding salinity?
Okay, so the study for Larry Walker, we have really some data, and what we're going to do is walk through a presentation on PowerPoint that summarizes the work they've done to date.
Oh.
We don't have a report for you today.
Oh, no, I know not today. I thought that's what you're passing out on the 12th.
No, sir, that's for Fugro. That's the hydrogeology
Oh, I'm
study.
sorry. I'm sorry. Misunderstood.
Yep. And regarding the size of that one, we have not seen their draft yet. We have a meeting with them tomorrow to kind of do an over-the-shoulder review, so I'm not sure how large that document will be.
The only reason I ask is I'd appreciate if you could throw it in my box over there
Okay.
at Public Works. I tend to go by there. It gets me out of the house, and I like to read off paper myself.
Yes, sir, we can do that.
A quick question. I think I'd like to know a little bit more about the negotiations on Rancho Colina. Is there any, I know they're sensitive, I know they're private, I know they're behind closed doors, but man, this has been going on a long time. What's the problem here?
So let me give you the update on that. Is we've gone through some additional geotech study. We don't have the results of that report yet over on that southwestern corner of the McIlvain property. So we'll have that later this month, and so we'll know more about we've got the field works done, but we'll know more about earthwork and what the costs might be to build over there after we've got their study. So that's really been the holdup. It hasn't been any. We've been waiting on getting the fatal flaw or the constraints analyses together before we come back to you.
Yeah,
with a
I can't
recommendation.
imagine you getting a master facilities plan without knowing where you're going to build a plant.
No, sir. And what we've done is we've basically told Black & Veatch. So what they've done is they've prepared everything they could that wasn't site specific, for lack of a better term. And so what we've said is we don't want to spend any dollars until we've gone farther with a site. And so what the good thing is they've had plenty they could be doing in the background, but we don't want to get into things like visual analysis and simulations until we've got the location nailed down. So we are hopeful that early February we'll have a more formal update for you on the information we've gathered so far, and we'll be able to bring to you the information we have on both properties.
Okay, in this jump track, Paso Robles in the paper got a $6 million grant for their tertiary treatment plant expansion. And they got it through Prop 1, California Prop 1. And I was talking to one of the council persons up there, and he says that they had to be shovel ready to be able to even apply for the grant. Is that still, I don't know how much money's left in that pool of money or what the timing requirements are, but do you think that we would be allowed to be considered for some of those funds?
So there are different parts of Prop 1, and we've talked a little bit about them in the past. We are actually, we've applied the planning grant application for the recycled water facility planning study. That is part of Prop 1. And so we've applied for that. That's a $75,000 planning grant. It's much more challenging to get planning money for grants than it is the construction dollars. And the challenge on the construction dollars is you typically have to have CEQA done or be pretty close to having CEQA done. And in many cases, you have to be fairly far along in the design process. So some of those programs require that we be farther down the road. But what we're doing is we're regularly working with Kestrel, our consultant, checking in quarterly, trying to see what new findings there are as we're getting through this planning phase, so that and we know a lot about the Prop 1 rollout now. And what happens is there are, many of these are revolving programs. So they keep renewing every year or 2 years. So what you've learned about it now can help you better position in 2 years when we're farther down the road and ready to go, or a year and a half. So that's kind of a long answer. We're tracking them all. But yeah, we understand that, really the key is we got to be shovel ready. Now, one of the advantages to being a design, if you go with alternative delivery like design build, is you're shovel ready quicker because you can roll all that together. But you got to have the CEQA done. That's one of the challenges. And I'm not saying for every program, but for most of them.
I'd like to follow up on that.
Yes, sir.
I went to an Ocean Protection Council meeting back in September, and they were discussing the Prop 1. One of the opportunities is a commitment to deal with greenhouse gas reductions. If we make that commitment, it opens up a venue for us. And that's kind of why I asked you, like when you contacted Kestrel to get with me, and that obviously didn't happen, but I sit on the directory of experts to the Ocean Protection Scientific Advisory Team, so that might be a venue that we should kind of pursue. Assuming that, it's not a good, it behooves us not to assume that next year things are going to roll over. There's a big faction in Washington that actually wants to get rid of the EPA. So coming after this next election, there is no guarantees. So I think that the urgency of securing funding should be more pressing at this time before the election.
Okay. Yeah, and I'd be glad. Yeah, it would be great to sit down with you. I know we tried a few weeks ago, and I managed to pick a date that was your wife's birthday, so that wasn't a good day. So, I mean, it was a good day overall, you know what I mean, but not an appropriate day. So we'll definitely schedule. I would love to get your input on that.
Okay, any other comments from the advisory committee? Well, thanks for your work, especially on the funding. I know, having worked in it a little bit, there's a lot of buckets of money in Prop 1, and it's state funding, so we're not necessarily at risk with what happens with the federal government. That would be more on the SRF side of things. And there is money, Bill, that's allocated statewide. You would compete statewide, and then there's a bucket of money just for the Central Coast. And so we'll be able to compete on a much, the IRWM bucket will be geographically based, so we'll have better chances when that funding comes to light. We'll be further along as well. So still looking good. I think Prop 1's a good opportunity. I'm glad we have it because, the alternative is it didn't pass and it wasn't available at all. So at least it's available for us to pursue. Any comments from the public on B1? Okay, this is receive the update. So I think we did that. We'll move on to sub B2, which is subcommittee updates and recommendations. I know it was pretty quiet, so we probably don't have any, but I think we're going to next meeting, it sounds like. Do we have any from this last meeting? Okay. This is also receive and file. We'll move on to B3, the salinity source identification and control study update. Turn that over to staff again.
Okay, thank you. So I do have a PowerPoint presentation. And really, the purpose of this presentation is starting in June, the city staff began sampling wastewater, in order to help identify what the major sources of salt were in wastewater. We'll talk in a minute about why that's important. But so the purpose of the presentation today is to summarize some of these initial, what we call the salinity identification efforts, and some of the initial studies that we've done, provide some preliminary recommendations. The reason this is important to us, that salts are particularly important, is because there are regulatory limits often that apply to your discharge or to your reuse opportunities related to salt. There are water quality requirements. For instance, as you know, some crops are sensitive. We talk a lot about avocados. Grasses can also be sensitive to high chloride levels, chloride being a constituent of salt. And then if we have any sort of reverse osmosis, for example, if indirect potable reuse or groundwater injection is pursued, we'll have reverse osmosis as a physical barrier in the treatment process. And the more salt you have in wastewater, the more expensive reverse osmosis is. So, let's see.
You need somebody to somebody in the way.
Podium in the way? All right.
You can go up to the podium.
Okay, so the first slide I'd like to show you, so what we've done is we've put together a bar chart that shows the different constituents of salinity in the city's wastewater stream. Actually, let me back up. This is in the city's water supply. So what we did is we took samples from, we have there's a lot of water quality information from state water. And then we also took samples from city tap water. And it's tough to read this, but I'll explain it to you. So the first set of the blue and orange bars relate to levels of total dissolved solids. We have a red line running across the top that's what's called the secondary maximum contaminant level for TDS. And it's called a secondary MCL because it's related to taste and odor. It's not a health issue. But the aesthetic goal for water is, and many waters are way above this, but the aesthetic goal is to be below about 500. So you can see your city water is actually considered relatively low in overall TDS.
Mike, we have a real hard time seeing it.
Okay, sorry about
especially
that.
on the right with the angle. So blue is city water.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Okay.
So, well, the blue is the average tap water. The orange is state water.
Thanks.
Yep. The other chlorides, we're half of the MCL with chlorides. That, again, is a secondary aesthetic and aesthetic concern. On the hardness scale, we have a hardness table over on the right that you probably can't see because of the angle. But we show a yellow bar and a purple bar that represent moderately hard. The yellow bar is moderately hard. The purple bar is hard based on the water levels or the water quality levels. This water would be considered somewhere between moderately hard and hard. So it is a quote hard water supply. Hardness has to do with is an issue for you because hardness causes scaling on your appliances and it causes you to use more detergent than you might need if the water didn't have as high hardness. So a lot of folks are familiar with that term, but that's really what that means. It's measured in parts per million as calcium carbonate.
Can I ask a quick question, Mike? When
Sure.
you talk about the water supply, are you talking about state water or are you talking about the water Morro Bay delivers mixing with the wells and everything else going
I've got
on?
both of them in here. So what
Oh,
I've got
okay.
is your state water. Since you're delivering,
I'm sorry, which is
state water is your orange
Oh, okay.
bar, and then average tap water is your blue bar.
Oh, okay, thank you.
And so your average, the thing is your water is 90+% state water. So some of this is these are very close bars, as you can see when you look at them. So the other electrical conductivity, which is another indirect measure of salt concentration, we're also below the MCL for that. So I just put the MCL on there just to give you a frame of reference.
And that's a chart that most cities in the county would look like. Is that fair? Is that a fair statement?
I would say that you're a little bit softer than some other water supplies that are primarily groundwater, but you're going to be similar to other state water agencies, definitely.
Where exactly is the state water coming from physically? I mean, where you're sampling from? Is it Whale Rock or is it?
That's a good question. So the state water numbers that we have in here are based on the city's consumer confidence reports. So Rob, you can.
So we sample at a sampling tap that before it comes into the King's tank, so before blending.
Yeah, but where does that water come from?
Oh, the source of the water?
Yeah.
Sierras down to Lake Orville.
Yeah, but
through the Sacramento River.
in the county.
In the county. Down the canal to San Luis Reservoir, pumped to the Colonial Pumping Station, treated there, and then pumped over as, I might be skipping a couple spots, but basically coming across from Highway 46, Highway 41, East Valley area over to here, and delivered as treated water to Morro Bay through the Chorro Valley pipeline.
Through the Chorro Valley.
Yeah, so it's paralleling. Paul can probably describe it much better than I have since he built it. That's why he's grimacing as I'm describing it. But it's basically paralleling Highway 1 coming out from San Luis Obispo.
And I think slowcountywater.org has a rough schematic of the pipeline.
Okay. Thank you.
So the water supply itself,
Just to help Rob out a little bit, it does follow the Salinas line for a bit till it gets behind the men's colony. And then when it gets from there, it pretty much follows parallel to the Well Rock line until it gets to La Loma, opposite La Loma. And then it comes up to the Kings Avenue tank from there.
so the water itself is a source of salt into the collection system. So it's kind of your baseline level. Another source of salt in many collection systems are self-regenerating water softeners. So when we talk about self-regenerating water softeners, this regeneration process we talk about, many of you are familiar with, it's when the media in your softener is rinsed with a brine solution. And what that does is that kicks off all the calciums and magnesiums that have adsorbed to that media, replaces them with sodiums or potassiums, and gets ready for the next round of tap water that goes across it. So that's what's called regeneration. That regeneration process releases a brine solution into the collection system. Pretty small volume, but the sampling, what we did in the sampling process is we took nighttime samples and daytime samples. The reason you do that is because a lot of softeners are scheduled to regenerate at night when folks aren't using the water and there's less demand. So the sampling we did indicated that the salinity increased at night. So it appears that the self-regenerating water softeners, we've got salt coming into the system at a low demand period. It appears that the self-regenerating water softeners are a source of salt.
Mike, real quick.
Sir.
Is there any restrictions in place in Morro Bay? I should be asking this of Rob, of self-generating water softeners, or is it open? Anybody could have them. Anybody can use them.
Anybody can have them.
Oh.
There's no prohibition or restrictions. And Mike's going to talk about strategies for reducing salts, which will that might be part of it.
Yeah. So, and it may be hard to read these numbers, but basically the increase we saw at nighttime from self-regenerating water softeners, and I'll just take total dissolved salts because that kind of adds everything together for me, is about an increase of, say, 50% increase in salt concentration at night. Pretty significant considering it's a pretty low demand period. So if we look at salt contributions by source, and this one's going to be a little tricky for you to read, but let's stick mostly to the blue and the orange to start with. The ones that are the hardest to deal with in terms of salt management to the collection system are your water supply and your residential and commercial uses. So these would be, your sanitary uses, flushing the toilets and all that sort of thing. So it's tough to do much about those in terms of salt content. But the ones that we really want to look at are the self-regenerating water softeners. If we look at just the TDS, the self-regenerating water softeners wound up being about 12% of the salt load, it appears, to the collection system. That's just the brine.
Help me understand why that's separate from the orange, which is residential, commercial. Because don't the residential and some of the commercial have the salt? So isn't that hidden inside that figure?
Absolutely. So Yeah, and that's a good point. So what I would say is this is strictly the brine stream coming from the self-regenerating water softeners. That's all this represents. When folks are using the water during the day, that's really in that 28%. But it's that incremental, that 300 roughly parts per million of TDS. If you look at what that does to the total salt load, that winds up being about 12% of the total salt.
So they were able to separate that out because of most self-generating water softeners default to their backwash cycle at about 2 a.m.
Yeah.
So by doing the early morning, late evening sampling, we're able to separate out that brine from the domestic commercial. So you're still getting a little bit of that salt from the self-generating from the water passing across the resin media, but most of the salt coming from self-generating is through the backwash cycle, which is occurring unless somebody changes the time on it at about 2 a.m. At least that's on mine. That's what it was set for by Sears.
So again, for clarity, if there were no softeners in this town, the gray graph would go away because that's a function of the mechanics of the on-site facility, and orange would shrink a little bit.
Orange would shrink a little bit. How it would shrink a little bit is when you soften water, you kick off 2 sodiums for every calcium. And the weight of 2 sodiums is a little higher than the calcium. Yeah, so that would still come down a little bit too.
When you talk about commercial, is that like industrial? Like, is that like Mission County or Culligan or what?
So that, and that's going to lead, that's a very good question for the next point I was going to make. What we did is we split out Culligan separately. And we Culligan's been a very willing partner in this. I mean, they allowed city staff to come out. They took us on a tour of the facility, let us take samples, answered all the questions, let us do all the testing we wanted to do. And we found was that they wind up contributing right about, I think that's about 14% of the salt load is the brine coming from Culligan. But again, they're willing to work with the city to figure out what else to do
I'm
with that
confused.
brine.
So is Culligan backwashing into the sewer system of Morro Bay?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Generally speaking, that's not usually what I see, but okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And so who supplies the water softener tanks and medium and everything?
For the most part, Culligan does in Morro Bay. There might be 1 or 2 that come over from Rain, but I haven't seen their trucks here.
Costco sells systems.
Yeah.
People can buy and put in their own too. So
that's more about
variety of
30% if you add the 2.
Yeah, it becomes about a 25% if you add the brine to the Culligan.
Yeah,
That's right.
we can't see the yellow
Yeah,
number.
sorry about that.
So-
Yeah, 14 and 12.
14 and 12. Okay, thank you.
But that's right. That's right.
I think there's a little confusion. I just want to make sure in my own mind. Culligan I look at as the type that come out, pull the canister, go back, and they recharge them at their own facility. Self-generating are the kind people go down to Sears, or used to go down to Sears or places like that.
Right.
Put them in their homes, add the salt pellets into the tank, and have them back flush every night. And when I talked about restrictions, I've seen where they allow the Culligans of the world to operate because people could still have soft water without the regeneration, but usually Culligan's not dumping into the waste stream of that particular municipality.
Those are called like portable exchange
Right,
cylinders.
exactly.
And what Culligan does is they take the portable exchange cylinders and they recharge them to this facility. And the
Right.
brine that comes off of this recharge is what's going in the collection system.
No, I
That's
know,
the
but
gray
usually in a lot of places they won't
Yeah.
put it back. The whole purpose
No, that's
of
right,
using
yeah.
the Culligan system is to try to get it out of that waste stream. Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. That's right. And so we did similar graphs with chloride and hardness, but I think TDS is the easiest one to grasp because it's overall total salt. So some measures we've already kind of touched on. How do you deal with it? The salinity control is often significantly less expensive in terms of O&M cost than just letting that water go through an RO system. So we like to look at this as a way to reduce the ongoing O&M costs and power usage for the water reclamation facility. But some of the most common salinity control measures really are public education, working with the industry on brine management. We'll talk about that. In this case, Culligan is an example. An ordinance with a ban or restriction, another way to go. And rebates or incentive programs. We'll talk a minute about what some advantages and disadvantages are from each of these. A lot of you can already imagine what they are. So, but public education and outreach. So this is really just.
Can I interrupt you real
Yes,
fast,
sir.
just for perspective on how many? Do we have an estimate of how many we have in the homes? So how many potential people we're outreaching to?
We don't know how many there are in the system, Rob. I don't think you can. It would be a hard thing to estimate, really. One thing I've seen done before is to take the salt concentrations and back out of that based on some common metrics how many contributors we think there are. But as you can imagine, there are different sizes of units and different flow rates and all that sort of thing. So it's tough to really get a head count. It's not the kind of thing that requires anybody to get a license or permit or necessarily anything to put in. So.
Well, you should get a plumbing permit.
How cooperative was Culligan?
Oh, they're very cooperative.
I mean, do they have a customer list?
Well, we haven't asked for that, but
They typically don't service the self-generating.
Right.
So you just go down to Albertsons and buy your bags of salt
Yeah.
and load it up, or go to Costco, or
yeah.
But do we have at least? Do you have a wild guess of 50%, 25% of the homes, 2%?
No, I don't. I really don't. The thing I would say is the thing that's interesting about this is I think the water here is kind of on the softer end of water supplies in the county. My thought would be is that some of these softeners might predate, in some cases, the switch to state water. Not the softeners themselves, but the folks that have softeners might predate the switch to state water in some cases. So I kind of wonder if you could look at it based on age of homes and
Yeah, I'm just curious because I know one person that has it and they don't use it for that
Yeah.
very reason, because they moved here after state water and just don't use it. So if this is 12 or 14% of the problem and it's only a few homes, it'd just be interesting to know what we're dealing with here.
Yeah. I think we could bracket it. I think we could get a range and figure out, is it 1,000, is it 5,000, is it 200?
And I like your methodology
that.
that you're proposing.
We can estimate that, so we'll do that.
Is this a big deal, though? In other words, is the reverse osmosis process that you're talking about that's affected by the salts in the wastewater, is that a big deal? What is the degree of dollars we're talking about? Maybe it's a non-issue, or maybe it's a big deal. I haven't got the perspective of what it's going to cost the plant.
Yeah, and we don't have the O&M costs yet on the plant, as you can imagine. But what I would say is the dollars that we're talking about, when you estimate that you're going to operate a new water reclamation facility for 30 years, 50 years, very long time, then what can be, a few bucks here and there can really add up over time. So in general, it's an order of magnitude cheaper to implement salinity control than it is to run your RO higher for 5 years. So you get I would say, and we'll be in a better position to quantify this once we get through the facility master plan. And the nice thing is you have some time, council has some time to consider what control measures they might want to analyze and implement, because we've got the 5-year implementation. But I would say in every case I've analyzed, it's a lot cheaper to do this than it is to try to treat everything with RO.
So a magnitude is not a decimal place. It's a factor of 2. Half.
We'll figure it out. When I say order of magnitude, I'm saying factors of 10. Huge difference. Yeah. It can be a huge difference.
Mike, I've got one last question, hopefully. And for me, if you're looking to put an RO unit out on the waste stream side of it to get rid of some of the salinity, I'm wondering why we're not doing it on the potable water side before it goes to people, trying to clean up the water. Then they don't need the softeners because they're being delivered softer water, and not worry about so much on the waste stream side, because you're cleaning up water before you might be sending it out to ag use. Why not be cleaning up the water at the beginning of the stream where it comes into people's homes? I mean, that's the logic I'm jumping to based on what I'm hearing today.
Sure.
We have the RO units that are set up for the potable water side right now, and as I couldn't read it clearly, but I assume that the potable water coming from the state, I think you said around 500 milligrams per liter TDS. So, and generally speaking, I think most people look at hardness around 200 milligrams per liter, unless it be considered, nice water for purposes, for drinking purposes, trying to either clean and blend before it goes to the people. Then it's a soft, easier way to have people give up their self-regenerating charges. When I moved here, there was one in my place. I threw it out. And like you say, it predated state water when everything was well water, and these people had them and used them on a regular basis. And I'm sure they're out there in a lot of homes that are barely used. People who come over 5 times a year from the valley or whatever the case may be still may have those in their homes, and they still may be recharging because those things are usually set up over a certain number of days to kick on and kick off to try and regenerate, although I think they're also based on the flow rate through them. But I'd like to see some thought given to maybe cleaning up the source water side prior to delivery to the homes, so that we don't have to sit there and clean as hard out at the wastewater treatment plant at the end of the cycle.
It would definitely help. The thing I would say is my thought would be that salinity control is something you could implement either way. Like the stuff we're going to talk about now are things that relatively less expensive than either one of those. Than clean it up with source water.
I agree. I think the restrictions need to come into play just based on why are you trying to clean up stuff where people are putting salt into the water.
The thing I would say, salt removal is very expensive with reverse osmosis. It just really is. And so you really have to think about what the goals really are for salt removal and whether it warrants the expense. I would say you definitely want to tackle this first and then kind of see where you're at.
Just in round numbers, when we run our brackish water side of the desal plant, treating the Morro Valley groundwater, we're talking about $1,000 an acre foot to run the lower pressure membranes, and we're already paying $600 an acre foot for state water. So it would, add 2/3 more to the cost of the water if we ran state water through our RO system.
I had a real quick question for Mike. I know we're talking about sources of water, but gray water leaving homes going to the plant, does that contribute to any of these loads? Gray water systems?
It definitely would, because that can carry some detergents and that sort of thing with it. Yes, and it carries it carries the water supply itself. So that definitely adds to the salt load. I don't have a sense of how much it would add, but it definitely does add to it.
I mean, is it possible that we can consider maybe more of a management of gray water in the town individually to help with this loading problem down at the plant? I know that, in fact, it was Councilmember Smuckler that did a gray water system up at Spencer's. Mm-hmm. And so maybe if we did more of those incorporated into the thing to help the bigger problem.
Yeah.
So just an idea.
Yeah, definitely. It would help.
This one's more for Rob. Going back to Culligan, do they need a NPDES permit to dump into our collection system?
No, we don't have a industrial waste program here in Morro Bay. We're too small, they really have no restrictions other than they can't dump toxics down the drain.
So maybe it would be something that council would maybe consider, like looking at a surcharge or something so not to subsidize businesses that way, because if that's, you know what I'm saying? It's like if we have this kind of 14%, that's substantial.
Yeah.
Maybe some kind of an agreement, because then that way the citizens aren't just burdened with everything.
Right, and I think Mike's going to get to that.
Okay.
Ways to solve the industrial user, basically keeping them out of the collection system.
Well, and what I could do, I'll skip to that one and I'll come back to the other one because we're on the topic. So the industrial discharge strategy, a good example of this is a project we're involved with the city of Oxnard. And an older project, the salinity management pipeline that you may have heard of, the SMP in Ventura County, that's a pipeline that discharges to the ocean and it picks up brine from reverse osmosis systems. Some's from industrial, majority of it's from municipal water plants. And it picks up what you call clean brine. So it's not picking up brine that's being generated by wastewater treatment. It's picking up brine that's basically minerals, calcium, magnesium, sodium. And it's a pipeline that picks all that up, and then it has a shared ocean outfall with another facility. So, one strategy could be a partnership between the city and the facility owner at Culligan's he's been very open. He has been willing to let us take samples and talk to us about the system, and he understands that he can help kind of be a partner in this and help reduce the salt content and still be able to do business. So one thing we could consider is this low threat discharge concept using the ocean outfall. We're going to be generating a brine at some point that will be likely discharging through the outfall that's going to be similar in content to what their brine is going to be. So that could be one way to deal with it. And again, it'd be limited to just their brine stream. It wouldn't be their restrooms or floor washdown areas or anything else. It'd just be limited. And the city of Oxnard is developing what they call the CCS, the Concentrate Collection System, and it's going to have a big industrial component to it. The only industrial contributors are going to be facilities that have RO on the water supply coming into the facility. It's going to take that brine stream and it's going to put it in this pipeline, separate it out from the wastewater collection system, because they've got millions of gallons a day of relatively clean brine going into the collection system down to the plant. So they're going to be doing this on a large scale. So jumping back to another control measure, public education and outreach, some of the disadvantages to just straight up education and outreach with no ordinance or no rebates is you're really relying on kind of public change, and it relies on continued outreach. You have to keep doing it. With any of these, you'll have outreach and continued communication. So this might be a component of any of these programs. But the advantage to public education and outreach, it's relatively low cost. A city of about 50,000 people that we looked at as an example that was provided by Larry Walker Associates spent about $50,000, I think, for an outreach program for a year. And that's just really brochures and mailers and stuff like that. So it's still important to communicate to folks why you're doing what you're doing, but that alone might get you a 10% reduction on that, 15% of load. So it might get you a 1% decrease in the salt load. The ordinances, and so this is just like any other ordinance. It can take time for public hearings, can take time for any discharge studies that need to be done to satisfy any legal concerns or tie it to a permit requirement. Can be resistance. There are inventory and accounting challenges. There's the need for regular inspections. So those are all the downsides, resource intensive, but it can be very effective. And the positive is you don't have to say folks can't soften at all. They can switch over to the portable canister type systems, and that would significantly reduce, that would take out that little gray wedge we saw, that 14%. That would pull that out of the pie. So the portable exchange units, sometimes that can be an undesired alternative for folks because somebody has to come out and change those and they're on an ongoing contract, so that can be one of the disadvantages, but those technologies are out there. And it's still less costly than other practices like source control. A good example of source control is kind of what you were talking about, Steve, is treatment of the water coming in or going to a different water supply, or advanced treatment. This will still be less expensive than that. But rebate and incentive programs, so these are very positive, but as you can imagine, they're expensive. It involves offering a rebate to folks to exchange their self-regenerating water softener or pull it out. You have to verify it through some sort of inspection, but it'll work. It'll work well, and you have a high possibility of participation as opposed to just public outreach, because there's an incentive to folks to do it. But the cost for these can vary. Some agencies will refund the whole cost of a softener if they're an agency that really needs to reduce salts and they have an effluent limit for TDS that they've got to deal with. Sometimes the refund could be $1,200 or $1,300 a house. Sometimes if it's not, sometimes it can be a few $100s. So those rebate programs and amount of money can vary. So some of the conclusions really that we had really are that 75% roughly of the salt load that we saw during the sampling period, running roughly from June through September, was coming from water supply, commercial use, and residential use. About 25% came from industrial discharge, that from Culligan, and also from the brine from self-regenerating water softeners. So about that quarter is what we really want to focus on as being the, quote, low-hanging fruit. Not that this work doesn't take effort, but there's a whole lot less capital cost to implement these solutions than there are salt removal at the plant. So the recommendations that we have for the next steps really are to develop a schedule, budget, and then goals for public outreach and education. Consider options for ordinances to control the self-regenerating water softeners, look at what those might be. Evaluate the cost and potential benefits of a rebate or incentive program. Continue working with Culligan and Regional Board for a brine discharge strategy specific to them. And then bring recommendations for a salinity control plan back to the Citizens Advisory Committee and Council. And so Larry Walker and Associates, they have a contract with us now to get through the salinity identification, and then they're prepared to provide support to us and helping us put together the costs and schedule and all that sort of thing on these different measures. So that really is the next step in the effort.
Let me just ask first before we go to the board, any public comment? Hey, all right, we got some.
Steve McIlvaine, I think since the committee is looking at a possibility of eliminating the self-regenerating systems, the question is, if those people do go to the brine containments, is there really any significant change? Because all you're doing is moving it out of one part of the pie chart into the other part, where the brine's going to be still discharged back into the system. So I think that's something you need to consider if you go in that direction.
Yeah, that's a good question. What I would say is the plan is, that we pull, let's say if they're a Culligan customer on those canister systems, that there's, that needs to come entirely out of the collection system. So that's right. If that's kind of where you were going with it, there's no point if it's just going to be recharged at Culligan anyway. There'd be no point in having the ordinance. It has to go with whatever we do with Culligan.
Okay, thanks. I'll open it up to any questions or comments on the advisory committee. Looking to my right. Dale's itching.
Well, no, it's just a silly thing. Can we get a bigger screen down here someday?
Yeah.
I was just looking at this room, and it's really not set up for anybody to view that except for us sitting over here.
If we had a bigger screen down here, we could probably see it.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure
Thank
if
you.
it was adjusted correctly on the focus. to be honest.
We'll work on that.
Anyone else over here on the right side? Stephen?
Oh, okay. Real quickly, first of all, to Rob, I wasn't advocating you running the RO for the state water coming through. I was only advocating that if you plan to put RO on the tail end of this thing. Do you follow what I'm saying? Because you might as well make the product better. And I'm not sure, is there any other process out there other than distillation that you can actually remove salts from the, I don't know of any.
I don't know of any,
Oh, okay.
and-
So I just want to make sure in my mind, you're hoping is what I'm hearing, and I hope so too. This is low-hanging fruit. I don't understand why Culligan's dumping in, first of all, into your sewer system right now. But it would be nice if you do try to do any kind of reduction in salts other than that, be mechanical means like RO or something like that. Let's do it on the potable side. Then that precludes the need of people to even need the water softeners in the first place if they're getting a better quality water coming into their home. That's all I was alluding to in that. I'm not, like I said, I wasn't advocating to go to this. And like I said, I don't know of any other process you would have to remove salts other than RO if we can't do it through some kind of regulations. And I think the self-regenerating, I've seen a lot of town or county areas that do it where they restrict them, put them on Culligan, and have Culligan take their brine somewhere else. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Bill?
You know, one point too that Bruce kind of reminded me of too that I wanted to is really you on the wastewater side. If you have indirect potable reuse, meaning discharge to an aquifer that you're drawing out of for drinking water, then you have to have reverse osmosis anyway.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, so that's a physical barrier that's required by the state. So you have to have that for groundwater injection into a potable aquifer.
Does the entire stream have to go through?
No, you
If
could
you're-
split that stream so you're not ROing everything.
Well, that's what I'm wondering. It sounds to me like it maybe you have to run everything through it.
What happens is you can split it. It's based on it's a complicated formula, but it's based on your total organic carbon.
Oh, okay, so there is like a maximum limit allowed, and you're trying to meet that requirement.
But you're ROing the majority of it.
Oh, okay, so it would require it if we do go to that direct, what do you call it, direct injection?
Indirect potable reuse.
Yeah, potable reuse, thank you.
Well, I'm wondering whether Cayucas' salt contribution to the plant is greater than Morro Bay's because they don't have access to state water, and state water has a lot less salt in it than Wells. So I would think that Cayucas would be dumping a lot more salt into our system than Morro Bay would be. So did you check on that?
No.
Okay.
Good point.
Yeah. Okay, well, then the second thing that I was reconfirming is that if we principally use groundwater recharge as our disposal of our wastewater, the salt content would be the same as that if you watered the avocados, or less. More or less salt is allowed in groundwater recharge than agricultural use.
The thing I would say is the fact that you have to use reverse osmosis on so much of the water that your salt concentration doesn't really become an issue anymore. Because the salt concentration after you run water through reverse osmosis, it's so low to meet the state's regulatory requirement that you have RO that you're below any thresholds that you would have with avocados or any other use.
Would you have to go through RO if you did groundwater recharge only?
Yes.
Okay.
Over here on my left.
Yeah, Mike, is it possible to get a copy of your PowerPoint sent
Yes.
to us so we have?
What we'll do is we'll post it. You know, with the holidays, I didn't get a chance to get everything posted early, but we'll get that online so everybody has access to it.
Anyone else? No? Okay. Thank you. I just two things. One, I think just for big picture too, so everyone understands, a 25% reduction will also get us maybe less capital costs on construction because we're putting in less RO filters, membrane filters, and then on operations and maintenance, less energy because we're not having to push as much water through or as much salt through the membranes to remove it. So there's a significant, like you said, factor of 10 potentially for doing some of these front end, low cost projects. And then on an ordinance, I was just curious if when you buy a home, someone from the city comes in, make sure there's a low flow toilet, correct? And well, I had that happen, so I know I did, at least for my house. But that's something that could happen here as well on transaction of a home, including the low flow facilities. There's an inspection for a water softener and then a requirement to remove it before occupancy or something.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of examples we can draw upon from, other agencies in our region and in the state to how they've, regulated self-generating water softeners.
Because I see that,
and we have our own example, like you said, the low-flow toilet that we require that change out here in Morro Bay.
Because that's a potential option as well to make it less intrusive to the existing occupant. That it's when it sells, the new owner, that they're not privy to having used it before anyway, so they're not going to get to know the difference.
Yep.
All right, excellent. We'll look forward to the recommendations that we can discuss later. Was that targeted for February, or when do you think you're bringing back this report?
This would be February. We need some time to review options with the city attorney. We need to put a good analysis together. So we're probably 3 or 4 months out.
Do you want any guidance from us? Because I think I universally heard it was a bad idea for industrial users to be putting their waste in the stream. Everyone shook their head when we talked about that. So I think that's something we would probably like to see. I like the idea of an ordinance of some sort. I think that completely makes sense, especially to save the ratepayer a significant amount of money in the long run.
I was going to say on the industrial side, though, my concern is salts because it's hard to get back out of the water. The organics from an industrial probably wouldn't be problematic. Is that correct?
And they really have to go to the collections. Some types of industrial have to go to the collections.
Yeah, and that's what I'm driving at is I don't want to preclude all industrial. It's just when we're cleaning up salts, which is a hard thing to do.
Yep.
The organics get removed along with the rest of the wastewater treatment plant workings. Thanks.
Okay. And then, I was kind of disappointed that we're looking at a 1% return on outreach. So I would suggest that that's probably lower on the totem pole of alternatives you bring back to us.
And then another thing we want to bring back is the estimate of how many units we think we're talking about, rather than, it may be simpler than we think it is. If it's a few units.
I was going to say, do you have a quick way to check to see how much is coming out of Cayuga? Is there a waste stream there that you could test for that salinity,
we can.
so to speak?
You go to Lift Station 5.
Because Bill brought up a good point. I hadn't thought of that. And
They could go right to Lift Station 5. All of Cayuga's sewage ends up there, so we could test it, and that's in the city of Morro Bay. So,
and I'm sure there's they get their water from Whale Rock, so there's probably Whale Rock consumer reports on it.
They get Paso water too, right? No, just all water, Whale Rock.
Yeah, that was all in the lift stations. Yeah. So Bruce kind of reminded me too. The data, we had data from several different locations. So we collected data from 3 of the lift stations, which are in the collection system and don't receive flow from Cayucas. And then we compared it to what was coming into the plant. And what we saw in the plant is the combined Cayucas-Morro Bay flows. We didn't see a significant difference between the concentrations.
So it appears as similar to what the Morro Bay makeup is. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, this is receive and file as well, so we will receive and file. Any closing comments from any members today?
I was just going to say real quick after listening to today, regardless of where we go, I think we honestly should be looking at an ordinance in either case trying to limit the salts that are going into our system right now and how we achieve that. And it's not unique here in California to do have restrictions, especially when you're dealing with water. While I won't say this is soft water in Morro Bay, it's not duly hard water either. It is a water that most people can live with based on what you got going on. The Culligans of the world, they serve a purpose as long as they're not part of the waste stream, and that's something we got to get removed from it. Thank you.
You know, a while back, I brought up the fact that, you know, you got, you know, the honey hut guys and, you know, Al Septic and stuff, and those industrial wastes. Are we even considering maybe something what you referred to as a concentrated collection system with regards to this facility, the facilities master plan? Because what right now, just to recap, the honey hut people, as far as my understanding is they have to go either to Soledad or they go out south, Santa Barbara County, I think, and the having the facility to deal with that and then treat it. It might be a revenue generating mechanism for the city.
There is an analysis of that you'll see in the master plan,
Right.
but it's not. You know, those folks they have to go through full treatment, like you alluded to. So, so they can't discharge to like a concentrate line that goes out to the ocean or whatever.
No.
But they could discharge to the headworks.
Right.
And so part of what Black and Veatch is doing is looking at that as an option in the organic waste analysis.
You know,
The possibility of treating that.
Yeah, another thing that I keep bringing up, and I think that it's an important issue, is the California state parks. I mean, they just expanded their state parks over here. They have these dump stations. I think that, you know, that we shouldn't be subsidizing their dump stations because that treatment is expensive.
Okay.
Good points, Richard. Anyone else?
These closing remarks?
We're wrapping it up here, so you better say what you got to say.
I guess my quick question would be probably for Bruce are the El Nino flows through the sewer as predicted or more or less than we thought they would be, or are we on the ball?
Too early to tell.
Too early to tell? Okay.
They're probably only penetrated 8 inches. Well, I just want to make sure they're doing it.
Wait till our February update. Jenny?
The only question I had is when you're going to go back and take a look at industrial users. You had mentioned state parks, and there's also, Mission Linen? Mm-hmm. And I'm sure there's some others, large industrial users in town that would, it wouldn't take that much work to try to find out what their specific percentage is.
Part of what we did with this exercise before we kind of narrowed down was we did screen the water usage information from a bunch of different ones. And so we really narrowed it down. So we looked at Mission Linen, but the water demand, water usage wasn't, we didn't feel like was as significant.
And it's in those instances where we can address this on the rates and charges. And if we have significant additional cost to treatment from these users, then we can set up a rate structure to compensate ourselves for those costs.
Yep.
Okay. Well,
Sorry, one more. Just for planning purposes, you mentioned some budget formatting reports. When do you anticipate getting those to us? A week, 2 weeks? Just a plan, so.
Sure. We should have a draft for you already next week.
Next week, okay,
Yeah. So
all right.
say by next Friday, we'll have a draft.
All right, and the reason I'm asking is we may also want the Citizens Finance Committee. Maybe I could get a couple people to look at that from that committee, if that would be okay, or somebody else from our committee here, as long as we don't bump up to more than 4.
I thought I heard you say the Finance Committee, you were going to have the Finance Committee review those.
I meant the Finance Subcommittee for WRFCAC.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the other Citizens Finance Committee.
Okay.
Just as a coordination type thing.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, wonderful. We covered an important topic in a fairly short amount of time. So we will adjourn and reconvene here, 209 Surf Street on February 2nd, 2016, 3 p.m. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.